I am live. I'm reading out of Eyes of Horus. It is a book by Joan Marshall Grants. She was a seer, a writer of her own farm memories. And this is her life as Ra-Up, who is the heir to the nomarch of the Oryx. He has met his love, Mary, with an E. And in this chapter here, Mary met Chios, who is his sister. This chapter is entitled Prince Men-HET. It's in the 5th part of this book, and I stopped halfway through because of the battery. They are discussing here they're discussing here who should be a watcher and who is good material to be a watcher. The watchers being the group of people who want to defy and fight the corrupt Egypt. This place 3,500 years BC. Mary answered her, "He isn't often in the royal city. His elder brother is terribly jealous of him and is always trying to influence Pharaoh to send him off on punitive expeditions when any of the neighboring countries get disobedient. I think Pharaoh genuinely believes that it is done in the honor of the royal house, and he sees himself through his son as a warrior pharaoh. But of course the heir hopes Men-HET will be killed. He's very popular with the army, and they guard him well. If they didn't, I expect he would have been murdered by now. He was wounded in the arm only a month ago. That's why he is in the palace, and I don't think he will go away again until his father has died or until his father's death. There are many people who think he'll challenge his brother's power as soon as it is obvious their father is dying, and he knows that many people would be only too glad to take his side." "Is he married?" "Yes, but it isn't a real marriage, although she has given him 2 daughters. It was an alliance arranged by Pharaoh, because it was easier than reinforcing the garrison on the northern boundary. There is no secondary wife, though he is said to be fond of women." Chios pulled a stem of grass and chewed it reflectively before joining the conversation. Then she said, as though giving a careful, considered judgment, "Prince Men-HET is popular with the army. Therefore, if he is not chosen, we may have to fight with swords as well as wits. He is the natural heir, or will be, when we have finished with his brother, and yet Rodan prefers the vizier. Why? Vizier. Why? That is one of the things we must find out. The prince has a wife, but they are not fond of each other. She has a house of her own, and it is only to conform with etiquette that he shares it with her when he is here. Another why. He is fond of women, yet he has no secondary wife. Therefore, what is more natural than that he should be looking for a concubine, which is the reason, and I can't think why we didn't realize it before, that for the present, Chios is a concubine." Within a few days it began to be whispered that the younger prince was infatuated with a woman who had come to live at the house of the 4 Acacias. An hour before dawn, Sebek, or I, watched for the signal of a light in Chios' window, and if we saw it, we climbed over the wall to hear her news. We always had to leave her before sunrise, for this added precaution had become necessary since she had warned us that Prince Men-HET, being afraid she might be imperiled by his enemies, had set a guard of his most trusted soldiers on her house. It was most fortunate that her garden and mine adjoined, for otherwise it would have been most difficult to have visited her without suspicion, there always being 2 soldiers in the road before her entrance gate and another in the narrow alley, which ran at the foot of the garden. One of Men-HET's personal bodyguards, a captain, who was also kinsman of the nomarch of the Tortoise, belonged to the watchers, and it was he, acting on Hanuk's orders, who told his master of the beautiful stranger who had arrived in the royal city, and had already become the subject of excited conjecture among the young nobles. This had been quite sufficient to secure an invitation for Chios to Men-Het's pleasure pavilion, overlooking the river, where he entertained his most intimate friends. "There were 3 women and 5 other men there," said Chios. "One of the women was very pretty, with red hair like her Minoan mother and blue eyes. She had belonged for nearly a year to one of Men-Het's captains. Otherwise, I don't think I should have had much chance of capturing the prince's whole attention. I talked to him on all the subjects I thought most likely for a concubine. First, I compared the new style of wall paintings with those left to us by the older generations. I think he found this very dull, but he was obviously intrigued by my unexpected field of knowledge. I only repeated what father says about some of the new drawing scribes, so it was quite easy to be convincing. Then I asked him if he had used the same strategy in quelling the rebellion in the land of gold as he had used against the Puntites. It was Hanu's idea that I should use this line of approach, which shows he is wiser than a woman at finding the way to a man's heart. By the end of the evening, Men-Het would not have noticed if any other woman's eyes were blue or brown, and the next morning he sent me a magnificent turquoise necklace and an ointment jar, alabaster inlaid with lapis. I should have been much less anxious about Chios if we had been able to keep to our original plan of having Sebek accompany her as a servant, but this she refused to allow, saying that he was already too well known to risk his being recognized, and reluctantly I had to admit the force of her judgment. She was fully aware of the dangers she ran, but she was not concerned with the possibility of having to become a concubine in more than name. She said, "Now it is known that Men-Het shows his favour for me so openly, no other man will dare to pay me more than the most formal courtesy. Sebek seems convinced that Men-Het will soon grow impatient of my evasions. But then Sebek has always underrated my intelligence. Nearly every woman in Egypt would be over-eager to offer the hospitality of her body to the younger prince, and this he well knows, and has long grown weary of their compliance. When his eyes grow too warm, I talk to him of the strategies of fighting men, and when he bores me with too long a story of some lengthy campaign, I make him remember that I'm a woman whom he ardently desires. But if he tries to caress me, he finds that I have suddenly become colder than the winter Nile. He tried to find out who my parents were. I didn't realize why, until his captain, the one who belongs to us, told me that if it were possible to obtain the royal permission, he would make me his secondary wife. This was a complication I had not considered. What did you tell him? If he connects you with Oryx, he may somehow discover who you really are. He would realize that the nomarch's daughter would never come here as you have done unless she were a spy. He will ask himself, why should the Oryx spy on the royal house? Never forget, Chios, that there have been conspiracies before, both against his father and his grandfather, and death. When at last it came, it was very welcome to the conspirators. Do you think Hanuk didn't warn me of that? Of course he did, and I came prepared with a story to use, if necessary. Would you like to hear the story of your little sister's childhood? I said I most certainly should, and this is what she told me. I do not know who my parents are, for I was abandoned near a little village within the boundaries of the Leopard when I must have been less than 2 years old. I was left at the door of a widow whose husband and only child had recently died of the black sickness. When she saw me, she thought the gods had answered her prayers by sending her another child to love. That I was not a mortal child she never doubted, for my clothes were of the finest mist linen, and I lay in a cradle of cedar wood trice-banded with electrum. On each side of me there was a wine jar, and both were filled to the brim with gold dust. The widow was afraid that if she told the village headman, he would take the child away from her, for he might not believe it was an immortal baby, and so would think she had stolen it from its rightful parents. So my foster mother buried the jars of gold under the floor of her house and brought me up as her own child. Only when she was dying did she tell me how I was found and where the gold was hidden. As a child, I had fleeting memories of a great house with many pillars, and of a garden bright with flowers in which was a pool where fish swam among lotus. I now realize it must have been my parents' house, but my foster mother used to tell me they were only dreams, of which I must not speak to other children. Men-HET was overjoyed when I told him all this, and he is determined to find out who my parents were, for he says it is obvious that I am of noble blood, and as soon as this can be shown, he will make me his wife. You will have to escape now, while there is still time. Don't you realize as soon as his messenger returns from the leopard, he will know that you have lied? Kia sighed. Will you never believe that I'm not very foolish? Didn't I tell you Hanuk and I had arranged the story? There was an old woman in that little village, and she had a foster child about my age. She died, and the child left the village 3 months ago. No one there knows where she has gone. But it happens that she is a watcher, and is now in Hot-Habra. The house is deserted, but a most convincing hole and part of a broken wine jar will be found in the floor of the larger room. The girl is not really very like me, but we are of the same height and colouring, and the description which fitted one would fit the other. Men-HET will soon discover there are no noble families whose daughter was kidnapped 14 years ago. I have already hinted that my mother may not have chosen her husband to be my father, and so any inquiries must be made with the utmost discretion, lest they bring sorrow or dishonour on the woman who gave me birth. I told Men-HET that if he caused her any embarrassment, she might kill herself, and then could never love him, and then I could never love him, for he would be my mother's murderer. Do you realize what all this may be leading to? I have considered the various possibilities. I may be tortured as a spy, and that, if Men-HET shares any of his brother's tastes, would be most uncomfortable. Men-HET may grow weary of me before I have learned sufficient of his heart to judge its worth, and if this happens, we shall be no worse off than if I had never come here. Or I may be able to advise Roland that Men-HET should rule Egypt. Do you love him? She looked surprised. Surely you know that I don't. Do you think that I would act as a spy even for the watchers on the man I really loved? Do you think that if there was great affinity between us, I should take so long to know his quality? If you become sincerely convinced that he should be the new pharaoh, surely you would marry him? It should not be difficult for you to take precedence of his first wife, and with your influence as the royal wife, you would rule Egypt. I had not seen her so angry since we were children. I told you I don't love him, yet you suggest that I intend to become the mother of their heirs? I am playing the part of a concubine, and if necessary I will become one. But if I did as you so generously suggest, I should be unworthy to mingle with the women who pleasure the soldiers of a garrison. Mary told me that all women could talk of nothing except she who has captured Prince Men-HET's heart. Officially, they cannot recognize her existence, yet they seem to know just what presents she receives from him, what she wears, even the kind of flowers he sends her each morning. They know that hers is the carrying litter with the purple curtains embroidered with silver fishes, and that the 4 Nubians who bear it belong to the prince, or did, until he gave them to her. They know that she will drink only the royal wine which is gathered from the drops the sun draws out of the grapes, that she washes her hair in an infusion of minnow and rosemary, that her unguents are scented with tuberose, not stephanotis, as was first thought. This I very well know, since I gave them to Kios. Even that she has a little mole on the inside of her left ankle. They speculate about her origin, and their stories vary from her being of royal blood, the daughter of Pharaoh's younger sister, who is said to have had twin daughters, one of whom was smuggled out of the palace to the rumors that she is the child of a virgin princess in the temple of the Great Pyramid, but whether by a priest or through the intervention of God is still undecided. When Mary told me this, we were in the little sailing boat I had just given her. It had a green sail with a device of 2 galloping oryx painted on it in white. Downriver came one of the smaller royal pleasure barges. There were 10 rowers on either side, pulling leisurely on the long gilded oars. Between the rowers was a raised platform shaded by a canopy, and there, reclining on a mattress of indigo blue, were HORUS and MEN-HET. I spilled the wind out of the sail to let them pass. Above the gentle beat of the oars I heard HORUS laughing. A monkey ran along the narrow deck and jumped on the royal shoulder. Mimu found herself in distinguished company. Right, so the next chapter is a weighing of a heart.